Welcome. You are watching episode 25 of the Mobility Talks, the web series by EIT Urban Mobility, with an episode on something a little bit different this time: safe and circular batteries for light electric vehicles. From the beginning of the web series, the common thread has usually been around urban mobility, modal shift, public space, creating change when habits and behaviors get very entrenched. In this episode, we'll be looking at something a bit different: the materials side of it. Materials are a dimension of sustainability that sometimes get overlooked. The focus is usually on energy sources or behavioral lifestyle aspects, but from material extraction through to materials transformation, use, and then the end-of-life management of a material, every step of the way, materials have an impact on the economy, the environment, and society at large. And despite all the attention that was given to the European Green Deal, the last term of the European institutions was also marked by a major focus on materials, for instance, with the Critical Raw Materials Act, or to come a step closer to the topic of the day, the European Battery Alliance. Because the question of materials cannot only be seen in the light of environmental concerns, it also touches upon another very central question: access to resources and sovereignty. So when it comes to the question of electrification of mobility, and in this case, the development of light electric vehicles, managing the batteries, ensuring they are safe and circular, ensuring that there is an access to the necessary materials and a stewardship throughout the life cycle of the battery, are critical elements for the deployment of e-mobility, especially when considering how these products are part of increasingly complex global supply chains that are at the mercy of geopolitical considerations, as we can see with the ongoing, shall we say, negotiations between the EU and China on electric vehicles. So I invite you to look at mobility from the perspective of a battery pack today. And our speakers will be giving you lots of insights on that with a new report by EIT InnoEnergy and EIT Urban Mobility that will be presented, as well as perspectives from the light electric vehicle sector and battery recycling. But let me also introduce you to yourselves. You were 80 people registering for today's episode, with participants coming from around Europe and beyond, and a strong participation also from public authorities. So please do get involved in the chat, raise your questions to speakers in the Q&A tab. We want to make this session informative and useful for you, so the best way to do that is for you to ask questions. So get stuck in, and I'll be making the link. So let's get started first with a presentation of a new study on batteries for light electric vehicles, and I am pleased to introduce Hernan Pajaro, Innovation Manager for Mobility at EIT InnoEnergy, and Hernan is one of the authors of this study. So welcome, Hernan.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you everybody for joining in today. I'm actually very excited to really present the results of this soon-to-be published report, not only because it's a collaboration between our sister company, EIT Urban Mobility, but also because we really believe or firmly advocates of the potential of light electric vehicles into not only contributing to our climate goals, but also contributing to our ambitions to build a really green and clean tech industry in Europe. So we wanted to take this industrial perspective and looking at the battery value chain, because battery has been a core component or at the heart of Europe's effort to really decarbonize the transport sector. So I will just jump right in because I have only 10 minutes. But just looking at LEVs, we're talking about a wide variety of vehicles, from e-scooters, e-bikes, e-motorcycles, e-mopeds. But the important thing is that we are seeing more and more of these vehicles in our roads today, and they are becoming a big part of how we move today. We started all with shared micromobility back in 2018. There are more and more of these vehicles across different cities, but it also kickstarted more and more of the, let's say, personal owned vehicles. And we're looking e-bikes already outselling electric cars by 2 times. And more recently, we're seeing more and more electric mopeds and e-motorcycles as well. And This is important because at this pace, we are going to see, or we're expecting at least, light electric vehicles not only to outsell electric vehicles, but also to outsell passenger cars as a total, but at least 2 to 3 times. And is this the sheer volume of vehicles that will create a big impact into how we achieve our climate goals? So let's zoom out a little bit and look at the road transport emissions. And it's not a surprise that we are not reducing our emission fast enough. And in fact, we are actually going to get a more or less 165 million ton gap by 2030 just with the current policies. And this is because vehicles are lasting 5 to 10 years. So that means that the vehicles that we have been purchasing today, they are going to be around by 2030, still polluting our cities. And that's why we're not getting our emissions reduced fast enough. So we really need to focus our efforts to reducing those CO2 emissions at the car park level. And here's where the LEVs actually come in, because we can really meet a substantial portion of the mobility needs of goods and people. Actually, 60% of the passenger car, daily trips in Europe are under 8 kilometers. That are actually short urban trips. And what is not a better solution for those short urban trips that light electric vehicles? And mostly because they can do the same amount of kilometers with less energy and also less CO2 over their lifetime. And just to give you a hint of what is the impact, we actually conducted a previous report on the topic, and we looked at how many of those kilometers we can realistically replace with shared micromobility vehicles, so e-scooters, e-bikes, e-mopeds. And just by replacing 13%, considering aspects like weather, age, and suitability of different use cases, we estimated that it's around 30 million tons of CO2 emissions that we can save, which is already a substantial part of the gap that we have. And I believe that there are more reports out there. For example, there is one that says that 50 million tons can be reduced in Germany alone, theoretically. So that's kind of like our bigger top end, let's say, impact. But the point is that it's not only emissions, but also a wide variety of benefits that we get. And I wanted to focus on how many jobs this industry can generate. And in fact, we're seeing that the LEV industry is growing its footprint in Europe. Now we have seen more and more e-bikes being assembled and produced in Europe. The entire bicycle segment has been estimated to have around 1,000 SMEs with more than 180,000 jobs. So these are an important industry. And if we look at the two-wheeler segment, we're actually looking at a very well-established industry with at least 11 brands globally recognized, operating 43 factories and providing lots of jobs. And many of these two-wheelers are being manufactured here in Europe. And we are seeing increasingly two-wheeler players putting into their roadmaps mostly electric scooters and commuters in the 1 to 4 kilowatt range, which is equivalent to the 55 to 150 centiliters motorcycles. So we're seeing more and more of these vehicles on the roadmap. But the big question now is really, what about the LEV battery, which is the single most valuable component of the LEVs, mostly 30 to 50% of the cost. And unfortunately, most of these batteries are coming predominantly from Asia. And these raise several concerns among different, let's say, EU players and politicians, mostly because of the exposures to vulnerabilities. But I would say more than supply chain disruptions, there is also, a lack of control on how we could ensure less CO2 footprint. I think there is a recent study that estimated that 60 batteries produced in Europe can have around 63 less carbon intensive that compared to a battery produced in China, for example. So there is a big case or a big push on onshoring batteries altogether for the electric mobility sector. But why not also to extend those efforts to really onshore batteries for our light electric vehicle segment, which is growing in importance. So we wanted to look at that battery demand from the sector, and our estimates really put the number at around 36 gigawatt hour of battery annually by 2030 and 71 by 2040, mostly driven by the growth of electric bikes and also the electrification of the whole two-wheeler segment, particularly e-motorcycles, because they have a little bit of a bigger battery. However, if we really put these numbers into perspective and compare them to the battery demand from electric cars, this only represents around 10% of the current projected demand. These are numbers depending on how ambitious the policies are. This really is a challenge for LED battery players, mostly because with these low demand numbers, it's really hard for LED players to secure a domestic battery supply. However, what we argue is that there is also an opportunity for LEVs, mostly because as things stand today, the low demand from electric cars, it's really putting at risk our planned production capacity. If you see in the graph, there is a mismatch between the current projected demand in the short term, so from here until 2030, and the actual capacity where there is tons and tons of euros invested already. So there is a risk of mismatch in the production capacity that could be used or leveraged to supply batteries for our LED industry. And what we argue in the report as well is that European LED players could really become ideal off-takers, particularly for the ramp-up of cylindrical cell production. And why cylindrical cells? Because this is a cell format that is most suitable for these kind of vehicles because of their structure is more suitable for the smaller form factors of batteries, but it's also a very established technology, a very cost-efficient way of producing batteries. And similarly, it's a standardized product that can be used for different applications, not only for LEVs, but also for EVs or electric cars. It can be used for drones and eVTOLs or power tools or even residential storage. So there is a wide variety of applications that we can use here. And we argue that there is at least, considering all the EU-made LEVs, we can estimate a 21 gigawatt hour capacity or demand for LEVs. And this is a strategic move, actually, because we're not only supporting the LEV industry, but by diversifying, the different target markets that we have for the same form factor, we could really strengthen and bolster our EU battery chain. And I'm running out of time, but we are also very, especially for this webinar, we're also went into details with the report, highlighting 3 specific aspects related to battery technologies that are very critical to accelerating the adoption of LEVs, and that's battery cost, safety, and performance. And really, when we look at the battery costs, it's not only the affordability of the LEVs, but also the competitiveness on the industry as a whole. We're looking, for example, that the two-wheeler segment is struggling to really reach price parity with ICE, which is hurting sales. And as well, we saw a recent slowdown on e-bike sales, mostly because of the economic conditions and the high rates and inflation. So really cost is a big driver for adoption. And cell chemistry plays a major role. It's between 60 to 80% of the costs of the cell costs, the raw materials. And we present some alternative LFP chemistries are probably touted as the one of the biggest chemistry for this, but also advancements in novel technologies like sodium-ion batteries are pretty significant and can contribute lots in this segment. When we look at battery safety, we know the fires, and this creates problems because of the confidence of the users to purchase these products, but also in policymakers. We have seen recent events in London and New York. And one important aspect here is that not all fires are actually because of technical defects. We can see these numbers in the Netherlands. So there is a lot on battery charging practices and handling practices that are important. So raising awareness is even more important than safer chemistries. And finally, in terms of battery performance, we concluded that it's really a key factor for enabling the electrification of two-wheelers, mostly because the battery performance, whether it's range, the weight, or the overall drive experience, it will impact how convenient or how these vehicles are an effective, a very alternative than the ICE counterparts. So really, but the problem is that the current alternatives on chemistries are too expensive. So really striking a good balance between cost and performance is key. And we're talking also a lot about the impact on regulations and circularity, but I believe these are other presentations coming soon. And just as a final thought, why do we want to accelerate the uptake of LEVs? It's because of this growing demand of moving in a more affordable way, more convenient, having less time for transport and even having fun. And most importantly, making this a sustainable alternative to mobility. And with that, I think I wanted to thank you for your attention, and we're looking forward to our discussion later on.
Okay, brilliant, Hernan. Thank you so much. Can you give us a rough indication of when the report would actually be made available potentially? What are we talking?
We are shooting for mid-July.
Okay, brilliant. So good luck with the final touches. So as you described, there are some specific needs for the light electric vehicle sector when it comes to batteries. But what you also highlighted was the difference of scale when it comes to light electric vehicles versus electric cars. And there is a lot of attention on electric cars. So now it will be very interesting then to hear from the sector representing light electric vehicles. Hernan, you will be part of the discussion in a few minutes, so you stay with us. We will now be hearing from Annick Roetynck. She is the manager of LEVA, the Association for Light Electric Vehicles. So it will be interesting to hear from you, Annick, on how you represent this sector, given these challenges that have been just described by Hernan. So over to you, please, Annick.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to present the Light Electric Vehicle Association. And I must say I am elated with the report of EIT. A lot of the things have been, assumptions that we had were being established there, and it's really going to be helpful to further the situation with reference to batteries for the light electric vehicle sector. But I would like to start with briefly introducing our association. Next slide, please. We have been, LEVA-EU has been established in 2017, and we work exclusively, we're the only trade association to work exclusively for light electric vehicles. We really believe that light electric vehicles have the potential for making mobility more sustainable, thus helping to tackle climate changes. That's why we work to improve the deployment and uptake of light electric vehicles. Next, please. I will explain that there is a wider concept behind light electric vehicles than just the electric counterparts of existing internal combustion engine models. But I will go into this a little bit later in my presentation. So our scope, it's a bit technical. There is a regulation 168/2013, which sets out the type approval for light electric vehicles, for light vehicles, including light electric vehicles. So we work on all these vehicles, going from electric cargo cycles to electric 3 and 4 wheels, but we also work on vehicles which are excluded from this regulation through Article 2.2, which have been listed there. So the e-scooter cell balancing vehicles and electric cycles, 25 kilometers an hour. Next, please. Two main activities. We are a members association, is to support our members in the field of rules and regulations. It's becoming quite complex and quite heavy, to be honest. So our members can do a bit of help to understand the legislation and apply it correctly, even though we're not always happy with the current legislation. But we also work actively with the European authorities to achieve better legislation and also to achieve good standards. One thing I would like to point out that we have done as well is we have commissioned the LEVA climate study. There's a link there to that study, and that's a study in which DLR has calculated how many car trips in Germany theoretically could have been done with light electric vehicles. I really encourage you to have a look at the report. It's quite amazing. Next, please. Next slide, please. This is our membership. We have around 80 members, all types of vehicles, components, and services. Next, please. So when it comes to the new battery regulation, this is really a huge change for our sector, because today the batteries are under the battery directive, and there was hardly any rules there for industrial batteries, the group to which light electric vehicle batteries belonged. There were no collection, no recycling requirements, no sustainability requirements. But with the new regulation, the European Union has gone all the way and has really imposed an enormous set of rules and regulations. And they have effectively defined a specific category for light means of transport. That's the use of terminology by the European Commission, yet another word for light electric vehicles, light means of transport. And so the batteries for these vehicles weigh up to 25 kilograms and are sealed, as you can read there. Any battery on a light electric vehicle, because that's a bit the problem, any battery on a light electric vehicle that weighs more than 25 kilograms comes under the category of electric car or electric vehicle batteries, and that will really cause a problem for certain vehicles. Motorcycles, for instance, will be able to split their batteries into different batteries of 25 kilograms, but that will not be the case for instance, for vehicles in the L6, L7 category. Next, please. This is very briefly a problem, being that the battery regulation requirements have to be complied with the party who puts the vehicle on the market. And as Hernan has already explained, the overall majority of the batteries come from China, so eventually it's the vehicle assemblers who are responsible for the requirements. The overall majority of these companies are are small and medium-sized enterprises, so that's going to be quite a task for them. Next, please. But going back to the concept of light electric vehicles, for the moment it is not established in law and in legislation, and I just want to briefly explain that is really hindering the development of light electric vehicles. Next, please. So I just showed you what is light electric vehicles included and excluded from the type approval for mopeds and motorcycles, and the current regulatory framework really forces light electric vehicles in an unsuitable corset. Just two examples. E-bikes are excluded from the type approval only if they have pedal assistance, because the type approval is too complicated. E-bikes without pedal assistance are under type approval. Nobody is producing them, they're not coming on the market, and this means that millions of people who aren't able to constantly pedal do not have access to e-bikes. The same goes for cargo bikes, which are limited to a maximum continuous rated power of 250 watt, which is largely insufficient. for riders with limited muscular power to go uphill and ride for a long time. Next, please. The same here, these are vehicles, the three vehicles at the bottom have pedals, are being brought to the market today as electric pedal assisted cycles. We know that the manufacturers would like to bring them on the market as L6, L7. It's just not possible with the current technical legislation. Next, please. So that's why we as an association, we propose new legislation, and this is relevant for the battery regulation as well, because we just almost not prevented big mistakes being made for batteries for light electric vehicles. So we proposed a separate technical regulation for all light electric vehicles, take them out of the 168/2013 and out of the machinery directive, create a horizontal regulation for these vehicles, and then add some standards of more complex vehicles, type approval procedures, depending on the weight of the vehicles and on the maximum speed limit of the vehicle, so on the principle of kinetic energy. The reason why it is so important to create this category is that the concept of light electric vehicles will become visible, not being light electric vehicles being electric counterparts of bicycles and electric motorcycles being electric counterparts of ICE motorcycles, but light electric vehicles as vehicles in their own right. Next, please. Yeah, my time is up. If you could move to the next slide, please. There are some encouraging developments where little by little European institutions are recognizing the concept of light electric vehicles, and the most promising development is within the expert group on urban mobility of the European Commission, where next week we will approve recommendation from the expert group to the Commission with reference to next road safety policy framework, where it is stated that the Commission must develop harmonized technical legislation and mandate-related standards specifically for light electric vehicles in consultation with our sector. I'll leave it at this, but the main message I wanted to give is that we will not be able to optimize the regulations for batteries and the policies for batteries if there is not a recognition of the concept of light electric vehicles, and that concept is potentially much more interesting and much broader than what it entails today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annick, for giving us this overview. We'll be devoting at least the next hour or so to light electric vehicles. So hopefully we can continue pushing to better understand this concept. So bear with us. You'll be part of the discussion in a few moments.
Yeah.
But first, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'd like then to go back to the battery. And I will introduce now Julius Müller, strategy lead at Circu Li-ion, and he's really on the battery side of things. So now we're really going to enter the battery pack and understand how on earth are we going to get recycled. Julius, can you take us through?
Very happy to do it, Jean-Paul, and thanks to the team for inviting us also to this talk. So at Circu Li-ion, our mission is to boost battery value. So for every battery that is produced and put into a light electric vehicle or any other application, we want to increase the value that you can get out of that battery. And so we've seen, values for the light electric vehicle sector specifically on Europe, but just in general, our entire economy is being electrified. And with that comes the question, exactly as you alluded to, Jean-Paul, what do we do with the batteries when they reach their end of life, right? And the critical issues to think about are what do we do with the raw materials when we have an end-of-life battery pack and we need to produce a new one? How high is the climate impact that it would have to recycle this battery? And then how, as battery manufacturers or manufacturers of light electric vehicles, how do we cope with the regulatory pressure that is put in place to sort of mandate recycling quotas for our battery packs. And that's where we come in. And we do care about light electric vehicles at this point in time, especially because it has been an established industry for quite a while, right? So we've seen the figures presented by Hernan on how many e-bikes, for example, are sold. Since that has been an industry that's been in flux for a while, you also already see a bunch of battery packs reaching their end of life, so they need to be recycled right now. That is a difference to what you might see with electric vehicles that are larger in size, so cars, trucks, things like that are very much still in the development phase and really just ramping up. So you wouldn't really see a whole bunch of volume on returning battery packs, and it's very much different on light electric vehicles. So the question comes up, sort of, what do you do with these battery packs that are coming back? And the key that I want to mention here is that when you currently visit a recycling plant near you, right, that receives the battery packs of light electric vehicles, chances are that you will see that they will put that battery pack into a big shredder, and then they use essentially a fire-based and heat-based process to get the materials out of it. That process has been established for quite a while, but it has two major issues. For one, you can't reuse any part of the battery pack if you do that. And the other thing is you lose a bunch of value if you shred a battery pack at the end of their life. So there needs to be a different way on how you get more value out of the battery pack at the end of the life. And the current process on how you do it is you disassemble it manually. So you take it apart, you see it sort of on the left, that is an e-scooter battery pack manufactured in China and then put into an e-scooter in Europe. And if you were to disassemble it manually today, that would take you roughly 50 minutes, even though it's actually quite small, right? But the individual steps required are so sort of difficult to do for a human, a lot of different tools, that it takes a long time. The alternative is to automate that process, right? And if you believe in the numbers that we've seen, that the market will grow and grow over the next couple of years, you will need to invest into ways to scale it efficiently and to do it automatically, right? And then you can bring the time that it takes you to disassemble and to recycle down to roughly a tenth of what it would take you right now doing it manually. And that's where we come in, right? So Circu Li-ion, what we have done is we want to save batteries at scale with our battery upcycling platform, where we have machinery and systems that we provide to recyclers, but also to companies that are interested in reusing parts of a battery pack. And they can use our machinery to disassemble and then to test whether there are still batteries in that battery pack that could be reused for some other application. So we've heard the cylindrical cells, they might be able to be used in power tools or in other applications that use the same form factor. So they might be using our machines. And what we've seen when our machines are installed at customer sites, that they generate up to 40% more recycling value than they currently do. It's way less labor intensive, so you really just need one operator instead of four for a scaled up production line, and it's 100% regulatorily compliant, which we've just heard is also a driving factor in this industry. And what I wanted to mention here as well is that we believe there are two parts that you really need to think about. Sort of after first use, you should think about how can I reuse parts of a battery pack of light electric vehicles in other applications or in the same application. And then after it has finally reached end of life, you should think about how can I generate clean recycling streams and actually get that material back for my own production here in Europe. And we've been doing that since 2021. This is just a bit of sort of how it looks on site. So in essence, you would diagnose a pack that would be coming back, whether there is still life left in it. then you'd open it, you extract the individual cells, and then you'd say, okay, this cylindrical cell, as you see on the very right, still has value left in it versus doesn't have any value left in it. And by doing that, you can enable upcycling use cases and recycling use cases, and both of which will become very important for Europe, as as we've seen, sort of over 90% of the battery manufacturing and production is currently being done in Asia, which will become more and more of an issue as volumes pick up. So we in Europe specifically need to think about how can we ensure that the critical material is accessible for us going forward as well. And especially on light electric vehicles, how do we make sure that that this specific vertical gets access to that material versus the larger ones in electric vehicles that are larger in size or battery energy storage systems. And with that, I think I'm going to leave it here, and we can then dive into the discussion. But very happy for anyone in the audience that wants to talk batteries. Very happy to discuss how we might be able to help.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Julius. I'm happy to talk batteries with you, and we'll be doing so over the next 50 minutes or so. Maybe we can bring in all the panelists. So Annick, Hernan, please join in. I mean, obviously, you've all raised quite a few points already, but I would like to come back to what Annick was saying in terms of the category itself. So we're talking here about light electric vehicles, and Hernan, you presented a report on light electric vehicles, but it seems that this category is not necessarily well understood or well represented. Maybe just to kick us off, actually, Julius, I'd like to go to you first. Do you know when a battery comes to you, whether it's a battery from a light electric vehicle or whether it's a battery from some other kind of vehicle? Is it obvious? And what would be the key characteristics of a battery that's coming from a light electric vehicle?
Right. I think it's a very valid point. I think in terms of can you distinguish between an electric vehicle that's larger in size and a light electric vehicle and the battery packs coming in, the answer is definitely yes. Right. You could just see it on the size of the pack. And how it sort of looks. Could you tell specifically, is this a scooter battery from manufacturer A or a scooter battery from manufacturer B? Without getting that specific intel from the manufacturer, you probably wouldn't be able to tell if you hadn't seen a bunch of variety first. And that is one of the issues as well, is that there is simply a large design variety in battery packs. So they essentially every manufacturer in the past could do whatever they wanted with their design.
And across categories of light electric vehicles, would you be able to identify a battery pack from a scooter as opposed to a bicycle or some other kind of light electric vehicle? Is that also quite an obvious difference, or can they be confused?
They can definitely be confused. I know that we have clients that have people doing manual sorting, right? So they would be getting 10 different battery packs, and then they'd have images of, okay, this battery pack for a two-wheeler sort of an e-moped looks like this, right? And for a scooter it would look like this. Then they'd manually sort. But generally, if you have a bit of experience, you can distinguish just from the outside. Once you go sort of down to the cell level, it then gets more uniform again. And you alluded to sort of the cylindrical cells as well. Those are used in a bunch of different applications, right?
Okay, brilliant. And so Hernan as well, maybe a reaction to what Annick was saying in terms of the recognition, let's say, of the category of light electric vehicle. Is that also in itself a problem for its further deployment, that it's not necessarily recognized as a category of vehicle as such?
Definitely. So one of the, let's say, main messages when we talk about the decarbonization of transport is that it's a sector that is driven primarily by regulations. We saw it affecting, regulations affecting positively with the uptake of electric vehicles in 2017, when the new targets were set, we saw a hockey stick in the electric vehicle sales. But similarly, we can see it impact negatively in micromobility. For example, we saw that Germany was not a big micromobility market until they finally regulated, and then suddenly Germany became, one of the biggest markets for e-scooters. So the point here is, without clear regulations or even recognition at the regulatory level, we are not going to be able to. We're just generating several barriers for the adoption of these vehicles. I think Annick pointed out several of them, and even in terms of developments and advancements and funding coming for new battery technologies and recycling and everything, without a proper regulation, even the terms are not in the regulations or in the funding allocated for electric mobility. So how can you even fund and finance and incentivize the demand for these vehicles? So there is a lot that we still need to work for, and I really applaud the work that Annick is doing on the light electric vehicle segment, because really without regulations, it's not really possible to move forward here.
But yet we are talking about light electric vehicles as if they were a category. And so, Annick, can you help me understand why there is this, let's say, conceptual barrier in terms of having a regulation that would understand these vehicles as being a category in itself? Are we facing a problem of policy and legislation, or is it actually a problem more from the mobility sector in a way, which might have a tendency of seeing electric versions of their counterparts as part of their sector, as opposed to seeing the electrification of a broader sector as being a category in itself? Is it more on the policy side that there's a problem, or is it also on the kind of more mobility industry side that there are some, issues with calling that a category?
Unfortunately, it's on both sides to make my life even more difficult than what it already is. First of all, the European Union has no, they're beginning to recognize the idea and the concept of light electric vehicles. But we still have discussions. Yeah, but for instance, if you don't have to pedal on an electric bike, then it's not a bike anymore. And to be honest, we don't care what it is called. I always say, call it, as far as I'm concerned, a carrot or a tomato, as long as it's a vehicle which is safe, first of all, very important, safe, and which helps to get people out of their cars. Because as we have had this DLR study, it really shows 77% of all car trips in Germany could have been done with one of the existing light electric vehicles, and we are really convinced that if they would remove the legal obstructions for certain types of light electric vehicles, that would be even a lot more, because you really need as many different types of light electric vehicles as possible to appeal to as broad a public as possible. My needs are different from your needs, and so on. But the Commission, we have been talking to the Commission that we want our own technical regulation to start with. And the Commission then said, well, yes, okay, but we are very busy, because they were very busy with the emissions on cars. So the focus of the Commission is still on cars, and they do not, and on reducing the emissions of the cars which are on the road today, whilst they do not recognize that these LEVs really offer a huge potential. And then there's the problem with the industry, because obviously electric bikes, very successful, 5.5 million in 2022 sold in the European Union. Originally, many of these companies active now in the field of electric bikes were originally active in the field of bicycles. So for them, electric bikes are bikes, and they're not really interested in any other light electric vehicles. They're also actively campaigning against, for instance, allowing or have better regulations which would allow for bikes where you do not have to pedal all the time. And this is the result of all this, of the protectionist reflections or reactions from some part of the industry and lack of interest from the European Union, results actually in the fact that we don't have this harmonized regulatory framework, And then everything which is related to light electric vehicles, the Commission has a problem with it. I will give you one example for the batteries. The original proposal of the Commission said we will create a category light means of transport batteries for vehicles with a seat and with 500 watt power. With a seat, that would have excluded all the e-scooters. And power, 500 watt power, what does that mean at all? It has no meaning. So obviously we talked to the Commission and the mistake was kind of corrected. But it's just the same has happened with the Critical Raw Material Act. Just because there is not enough knowledge within the European Union about the concept of light electric vehicles, and I keep singing the same song, but if we would have a horizontal technical legislation, that would be then the coat hanger for all the rest of the legislation, and the Commission would not have to sit down and think, well, what do we want to do for these personal mobility devices, micro-mobility, and so on and so on. So I really think it is extremely important.
Okay, so there are really two dynamics at play here. That's interesting because basically electrification is cutting across all the sector, a little bit like digitalization to some extent, and that creates new dynamics in the market, and I suppose that's normal. Okay, I would also like to touch upon the issue of actually access to batteries. It was touched upon in the report, and we see this dichotomy between a sector that is growing, more and more demand, but at the same time that remains relatively small compared to the larger electric vehicles. And the question then becomes, will the larger electric vehicles absorb all of the batteries that are produced locally in Europe, where we're already struggling to boost supply? So is the sector essentially condemned to access batteries that are coming from outside of Europe, I suppose is my question. Hernan, I mean, do you see that as a kind of an inevitability, or do you still see some pathways that one can boost local production also for LEVs?
Yeah, I wouldn't see it as an inevitability, but definitely it's a big challenge, I would say. And I would say I would see this problem from one perspective on not necessarily how the electric vehicle market will kind of absorb all of these batteries production in Europe, but how we can create an opportunity from the LEV segment or the LEV industry to the battery producers in Europe to really incentivize the production of these batteries. And that's what we really argue, that cylindrical cells could be that technology. And cylindrical cells are those batteries that we are kind of used to, similar to the remote control ones, that we can really put in several devices. We just need to put many of these batteries, and it's a very cost efficient, very standardized serial production of battery cells that it wouldn't be a matter of economies of scale, but economies of scale. We're using the same kind of format or technology to really cater to different markets, and that in itself is a strength for the European battery value chain, because we're diversifying. Our target markets. If something happened in one market, we still have the other market, so we could really balance out the risks. So that's for us, I think, an opportunity to really incentivize the demand, and then of course it comes on how competitive it really can be for the LEV segment. As I mentioned before, affordability is important, and unfortunately, European batteries cannot compete with costs. But then how we can really, using recycling, second life batteries, so all of these, let's say, alternatives that we have with batteries, how we can really reduce the cost and make it more competitive also here in Europe.
And Julius, how does this question of the global supply chains affect your work in terms of upcycling, recycling, upcycling batteries? I mean, you will need to be relying on also some local production, I suppose, for batteries. If that is also going more towards the larger formats, are you able to still upcycle, for instance, LEV batteries into larger formats, and do you see that might influence your work moving forwards?
Right. Well, I think in terms of upcycling from a smaller, light electric vehicle to a larger one, that's going to be a bit of a stretch. But in any case, I think, the question that you posed to Hernan as well, in the end, it's about cost, right? Are we in Europe cost competitive with the production of our batteries? And if we are, there will be demand, right, from our local manufacturers of OEMs, right? Currently, we are not cost competitive, right? Which is why you're seeing most of the batteries being manufactured in Asia. What I think and what we as a company believe in could tip the scales in some sense is if we were able to really reuse components of those batteries in an efficient way. Currently, we don't do it because it's not the economics simply don't make sense, right? You essentially just put it in the shredder and then you're sort of done with it. If you were able to reuse some of those components that then are cheaper than to procure new ones in China, that could sort of tip the scale for European production. For new production, I'm honestly a bit skeptical on whether we will be competitive in a short term. I think that will need more investment from all actors in this industry.
And Annick, please go for it.
I think one element which also needs to be taken into account is that many vehicle producers or assemblers are very small companies who do not work with large production numbers. So I would imagine that for battery manufacturers, it's quite a hard task to produce batteries for these. For instance, maybe you know that there's currently quite a large development in the logistics with cargo bikes, but they have certain requirements. The numbers are small, so I can imagine that it's not that interesting for European battery manufacturers who have this outlook on quite easy production of batteries for cars to say, right, we're going to do something for the light electric vehicle business as well. And I really applaud any efforts in Europe, any future efforts to encourage battery production or battery second life, repurposing and so on for the light electric vehicle sector. And we would be very, very happy and willing to look into in which way we could help with that. But at the same time, we feel that the companies in this sector are a bit a victim of a geopolitical game which is being played between China and Europe. And they risk to be really victims of that, because if for instance, there's talks about putting dumping duties on batteries from China for light electric vehicles. There are already dumping duties on electric bikes and on conventional bikes. If that would happen, that would really put the life of the vehicle manufacturers and vehicle assemblers at risk. So I think there too, there is really a need for a balanced policy from the European Union, and taking into account that for geopolitical reasons and also for the sake of trying to take sustainability to total maximum, you will kill off the companies that are producing the vehicles, and therefore you will affect sustainable mobility in a negative way. I think that's a very important point.
Okay, thanks for that point. So you're not, let's say, adamant that production has to be local. I mean, production doesn't have to necessarily be local, but one does need to have access to batteries to power these light electric vehicles. So if we're keen on promoting light electric vehicles, we also have to be keen on getting batteries from somewhere.
You have to be realistic. It's important to be realistic, and as I said, not to affect the vehicle assemblers, manufacturers, what we call them, in a negative way, because today the overall majority is depending, and we've just come out of a period where the whole component production, not only of batteries, motors is another important one, but also frames. We need for electric bicycles, we currently need 22 million frames a year, aluminium frames. Yes, there is some production in Europe, but we're talking about maybe 2-3 million for the moment. So you realize that where do we get the other? So I'm all in favor of these kind of things, but I am calling for realism, and I am calling for taking into account I should not. We have a saying in Dutch, which is throw away the child with a bathing water. I don't know if you know this saying, but that's what I'm afraid of, and what is already happening to a certain extent.
Okay, thank you. There are also some requirements on batteries in terms of circularity, the uptake of recycled content that are established in legislation. Hernan, how much do you see this circularity obligation as being either a problem or an opportunity for the light electric vehicle sector? Will obligations on recycled content, minimum amounts of recycled content in those batteries be a problem, given the smaller formats and that kind of thing? Or do you see it more as an opportunity to build a local production also for those batteries in Europe?
Okay, I think it's definitely an opportunity and a challenge. If we look, for example, at the type of battery chemistries that are suitable for light electric vehicles like LFP, these are not the value for recycling are very low, and actually you can incur in cost. You have to pay to actually recycle these batteries because it's just not efficient. It's not a good process in general. So putting just targets on the recycled material could be a challenge for these batteries at the technical level. However, there could be opportunities with new battery technologies like sodium-ion, for example, which is just, better for recycling. But also in terms of repairability, as Julius mentioned, these batteries are the lifetime is a little bit shorter than EVs, and we can create schemes for collection. For example, battery swapping can become an enabler for collecting these smaller batteries from shared micromobility operators, etc. And there are various ways in which we can really leverage these regulations for the good. However, it's better to really understand how these regulations will impact really, and we also mentioned some of this in our report, whether it is in terms of insurance for reused batteries, how that could really work, or if it's, for example, shared mobility operators are right now, because of battery theft, they are gluing all of the different battery cells to the battery pack, so it makes it even harder to repair and recycle. So there is a lot of solutions and thinking needed to really fulfill these policies, to really not make the best out of it and not put in danger or put more barriers actually to the industry.
Yeah, because obviously the end of life management is one part, extending the lifetime through various systems is another. Julius, I'd like to bring you in. I mean, maybe you have a comment anyway, just on that from Hernan, but then I would like to have a little bit of quick fire, because I have a couple of technical questions also on your part of the job in terms of managing batteries at the end of life. So I'd also like to have a bit of quick fire with you. So maybe a quick reaction to Hernan's points first.
Yeah, I laughed a bit when you said you get people gluing cells together and stuff. I mean, we've seen wild things, right, on what people do with their batteries. The key thing, I think, what regulation really has unlocked is renewed sort of look into this industry. What do we do with end of life? Because before that, no one really cared. It was just, okay, we need to get rid of them somehow, and we pay a fee to recycle, and then we sort of, we have it cared for. What now happened with that regulation is that there has been investment flowing into the sector, which in general is a positive thing. But I do agree that sort of the scope of the regulation sometimes makes it technically difficult for new battery manufacturing, especially on the LFP, which is like, one of the chemistries that's relevant, where recycling really isn't economically viable in most cases, and that then imposes additional costs in that entire process.
Okay, thanks. So, are you ready? Some quick fire. So, first one is, how do you recognize the defect cells within a closed pack when it comes to your facilities?
Well, our process is that we open the pack, we sort of get the individual cells out, and then we test the individual cells. It works a bit like an X-ray. I mean, there's, without going too technical, but you can see what the potential health of an individual cell is, but you first need to open it, otherwise you stay sort of on the pack level.
Okay, and second one, how do you separate the cells from the silicon with which the cells of vertical packs are sealed within the AI housing, I believe, if that makes sense? I'm not so technical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, there in general two ways, right? So you could think about a mechanical way or a chemical way. How we do it is mechanical. So we separate it in essence with a bit of force, and then the individual sort of weldings or what have you is sort of with lasers. It's a process that we patented to get individual cells out. But those are in general two pathways that you could take.
Okay, brilliant. And one for Annick, I think. Is the digital passport for batteries valuable for light electric vehicles?
Valuable or valid? Because is the question whether it applies or whether it is a good initiative?
Well, does it apply and is it good?
Yeah, it applies. We don't know yet if it's good. I would pass the question on to Julius, because I think we will have to wait and see whether it is good. It is a very big requirement, as I said, mainly on the vehicle manufacturers' part. So they will obviously rely on their suppliers to comply with it. For some issues, I wonder if it's all worthwhile. And this is one of the issues where I'm thinking, is it worthwhile? Another one, for instance, where I'm thinking, is it worthwhile? You have to recycle the content of the cells. Is that worthwhile for light electric vehicle batteries? Because the amounts, are they substantial enough to make it worthwhile? And I think a lot of these questions will only get answered. It's a pity that no more research has been done before developing this battery regulation, but that's rather a political issue, I think, than a technical issue.
Okay, Julius, do you want to add something on that? On digital?
Yeah, I think the concept makes sense. I mean, if recyclers knew how to, what the history of a battery is and how to disassemble, how to take it apart, that would make the entire process way easier. Will it be easy to implement? Absolutely not. Right? I mean, you have, as Annick alluded to, you have manufacturers, different suppliers that all need to supply data. There needs to be somehow a way to share that data between all the players in the value chain. And then also, once you reuse components, there sort of, does it stop there? Do you include that as well? How does that work with recertified packs? So all of that is a bit up in the air. And then one additional comment on the economic viability, I think for, if you're talking very small packs, it usually is not economical to go down to a very cell level, right? And in that sense, the battery passport itself is also a bit moot, because you then, there are certain packs that you are better off just recycling and sort of throwing it in a shredder and then be done with it.
Okay, and there are a few comments in the chat talking about the need actually for more standardized batteries. That would be very helpful. So maybe that's also a direction. I think Hernan was already kind of pointing a little bit in that direction. Okay, so we've talked a lot about.
May I comment on that, on the standardization of batteries?
Yes, please.
We have discussed that last week, and from there it appears that the technology is developing so quickly and it kind of does not make sense to have standardized batteries. I'm not technically savvy enough with reference to batteries, but that was what was being stated there, and it sounds quite logical to me. If you're going to start standardizing batteries, and then the technology moves on, and your standardized model doesn't work anymore, then you have an issue. So I think it'll be already a big step forward with the standardization of the charger, which is mandated by the battery, or which is somewhere in the battery regulation, like we have for the mobile phones. That might be a bigger step forward than standardizing the battery itself.
Okay, thanks for that clarification on your side. So we've been talking about batteries, we've been talking about the light electric vehicle sector. I would like to start talking a little bit about what we usually talk about in these mobility talks, which is, also elements around modal shift. And in fact, this sector is a good example of the modal shift behind, because we have batteries that are larger going to larger vehicles, and we have batteries that are smaller and lighter going to lighter vehicles. And so one has to choose what kind of vehicle one wants to use and for what kind of trips. So EIT Urban Mobility put up a poll recently on their LinkedIn. And so we can put up the poll results. So the question was, what is most needed to increase consumer uptake of light electric vehicles? And so we had lower purchase rental costs, friendly city infrastructure, improved repairability, and better battery performance. And what comes out top is friendly city infrastructure. So it's the connection between the vehicles and their capacity to be charged and maintained. So clearly then we start to have the link between, policy, public space, local actors coming in, and at least that's what people think, that it's the friendly city infrastructure that is key for the actual uptake of light electric vehicles. Hernan, what is your point of view? What would you have answered, and what's your reaction?
Yeah, so I think Europe is doing a very good job in terms of cycling infrastructure in general, especially with the new the cycling declaration. And a lot of funding is going into the cycling infrastructure, which I think is essential to really promote the uptake of light electric vehicles. However, when it comes to charging, it's not. It's a different story. So just when I'm driving my personal e-bike everywhere now, and I live in Stuttgart, and this is a very hilly city. And if I run out of battery in the middle of the city, it's going to be really difficult for me to go home, which is at the top of the hill. So charging infrastructure is needed in general. So where can I really charge my battery? It's still a big question mark. But personal vehicles is a little bit different. But when we look at the two-wheeler segment, it becomes even more critical because there are the number escaped my mind, but I will get millions of commuters in Europe right now for just mopeds and e-scooters and these type of vehicles. When we make them electric, the issue right now is that we cannot make the battery larger. So we have very limited space for making, increasing the capacity to increase the range. So we really need to find a good infrastructure for these vehicles if we want to make the commuter's life easier, because they will have to charge these batteries more regularly, especially when they do longer distances than just a normal, daily ride in the city. So I would say charging infrastructure is key here, and particularly battery swapping is one of the solutions that we could see, for example, in India and Southeast Asia, racing a lot. So these have become a really good alternative for charging infrastructure for electric two-wheelers.
Okay, so you're also going for that charging infrastructure. Annick, is that also the main problem that you see in terms of uptake of these vehicles?
No, unfortunately, I have to slightly disagree with Hernan. There may be cases where you need charging infrastructure, but I think it's rather a problem for the logistics services than for individual private use of light electric vehicles. I think one of the issues is not in the poll, because people don't know about it. It's the fact that there's vehicles which are not available, which they need. I mentioned 87 million handicapped people in the European Union, many millions of whom are not capable of pedaling all the time, and they can't get any vehicles. When it comes to road infrastructure, this is not so much linked to the batteries, but I think the member states need to review their policies. What they're doing now is a new vehicle comes on the market and they're thinking, or on the cycle path rather, and they think, oh, what do we do with that now? And then they start to create new rules for that one vehicle. We never did that with cars, whatever their size, whatever their speed, they're all allowed to go on the same space. So I think there too we need to start thinking in terms of speed and weight. Don't put together vehicles with different speeds and different weights. Speed pedelec, for instance, in many countries is not allowed on cycle paths. So these people have to risk their lives on roads where they have to share the road with trucks and vans and SUVs that can go a lot faster than them. So that needs a new approach. But I would like to mention one thing about the cost of the vehicle, which is very much, we have already seen it, related to the cost of the battery. And I think if there would be a much better offer of repurpose, or I'm not sure if that's the right technical term, so second life batteries, that would be a major and reliable second life batteries. That would be a major thing. I would like to quote the example of the Netherlands, where the Bike Dealer Association has gone into a joint venture with a company that produces second life batteries. These are sold through the dealers with a 2-year or 1-year guarantee. And I think that's really a good solution, because a lot of these bikes they can go for what, maybe 10 years, whereas the battery intensive use could be finished after 3 years, after 5 years. So if you could then change that battery for a second life battery, I think that would be a very attractive offer for a lot of people.
Okay, and Julius, would you say that there is anything in the battery that can or cannot increase the uptake by consumers of more light electric vehicles? I mean, if you were to say anything about the battery component of that, is there anything that can be a brake, or on the contrary, increase the uptake of these vehicles?
I think the key is how much money do you pay for the vehicle, right? So the unlock for me in terms of on the battery side itself is to make them cheaper, right? And then that might be through new technologies, and then you alluded to a few that are out there that could make it cheaper. So on that side, that's one. In terms of range, there might be applications where that is an important factor. I don't think it's prohibitive for most of the private use within a city as of yet. It might be for more of the the logistics, cargo, bike type things where that is an issue. But for uptake for private use, I'd say with newer LFP batteries, you're getting quite far, and I'd be surprised if that were still a huge factor.
Okay, and so I'd like to actually finish then on this point in relation to the type of mobility that you expect will be generated by light electric vehicles. Hernan, maybe first. I mean, do you see the market and the trend going towards shared mobility solutions through light electric vehicles? Or is the trend or the hope that actually they all become very conventional individual type of vehicles for individual private use, a little bit like the car has been. So what kind of bonus point would you place on that development? Are we going more towards shared mobility or more towards individualized mobility? And what is your ambition through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in general, we will see more and more private vehicles grow, especially e-bikes and even personal e-kick scooters, e-mopeds as well. it's still not a big market, but we're definitely going to see more of the personal use vehicles. And the reason for this is on the shared mobility side, we are seeing great deployment of fleets in general across different cities, especially scooters in some cities, e-bikes in other cities. However, we are seeing more and more of the major cities put in bans or a cap on the number of vehicles that operators can have. And we're not seeing that going away anytime soon. What we could see is more and more electric bikes part of the shared fleet in all of these cities. So e-scooters probably won't grow that further as the current existing fleet, but e-bikes probably going to grow more just because of how easier and more convenient e-bikes are compared to normal bikes for different kind of people, right? Older people can drive an e-bike, or people would have limited mobility or specific needs. So it's more accessible for a larger pool of people. And in general, that's the trend that I see when it comes to shared mobility.
Okay, there's a comment in the chat here to say that there is a trend towards BaaS. So that reminds me of Mars, but battery as a service. Users want to buy the application separated to the battery, which is also an interesting concept. Julius, I would also be keen to know whether you see a difference between a battery that's been part of a shared mobility system for light electric vehicles and a battery that has been attached to a vehicle for individual use. Do those different types of uses make a difference on maybe the lifetime of the battery, or what you receive basically in your facilities?
Yeah, just in terms of how they were used, you can definitely see that, right? The charging cycles are very different from shared mobility versus private mobility applications. So you would see that in how long a battery lasts, right? If you were to do it privately, you would expect it to last longer than in a shared mobility service, right? And then just in terms of how it looks, right? As we've said earlier, these shared mobility providers, they sometimes do weird things to their batteries, but also their customers do weird things to their batteries so, that you wouldn't necessarily do as a private customer, and then therefore sort of owner of that battery. So definitely you can see differences there.
And maybe just one more question for you that popped up in the chat, which I think you'd be able to answer. Is there any information on the best time to recycle batteries for light electric vehicles? And what would you say that time is in practice for current products?
The best time in terms of years? Well, you would look at it as you would look at it as, how many cycle times did it have and what's the sort of state of health that's left in a battery. If you wanted to use, or how usually, what the threshold is when batteries come back to recycling is when they have roughly 80% of their health left, right? If you were to open those up, you could probably find, just over half of the cells that are not actually quite fine, and the rest you'd have to discard. Anything below 80%, if you really, drive your e-bike until it really has no juice left, at that point it's just a recycling case. So it sort of depends on, do you want to generate any value with it at their end of life or not? But sort of the longer you wait, right, the more likely it will end up in just a recycling stream.
Yeah. Okay, and Annick, in terms of this shared mobility trend versus a trend towards more individual vehicles, what's the business case on your side? Is the business case to serve more shared mobility or more individual vehicles?
The more light electric vehicles, the happier we are. But I think for the shared mobility, an important factor will be how the cities deal with it, because we really have seen extremes and anything in between those extremes, from Paris, banning e-scooters, for instance, to other cities allowing anything and everything. And I think that is going to kind of level out. And I think, I hope it will continue to grow. Cities will find ways to embrace shared mobility and find solutions to welcome shared mobility in their cities. It's very difficult to predict how much shared mobility, how much private mobility. I think privately owned vehicles will still increase a lot. But as more types of vehicles will come on the market, people will want to have different types of vehicles. So not only a scooter, but maybe also a cargo bike to take the kids to school and so on and so on. And there it's still very early days, but we already see some private initiatives among citizens to buy. For instance, in my city, there's an area where the inhabitants collectively buy a cargo bike. But I can't get my head round to if those initiatives would further develop, if that would have any impact or offer specific opportunities for the battery business. But maybe in those circumstances, batteries as a service would be more important. I don't know. Can I add one more thing, which is also, in my opinion, very important for the future of batteries? It's surveillance of the market. Because it's as important as Julius has pointed out, that we have good quality batteries, and Europe has imposed all these very rigid requirements, but it makes no sense if then at the same time you allow whatever bad products to come on the market, which is sometimes currently the case, and there's not enough surveillance on that. It's the same with the vehicles themselves. I mean, you can just go on internet and at first sight you see tens of companies who are offering illegal vehicles. So I really think that there's work to do there for the European Union, instead of just continuing to putting harsher requirements, because those companies that want to come on the market, in order to comply with all these requirements, you have to have long-term plans. It's really not possible anymore to say, oh, electric bikes are successful, I'm going to give it a try. No, you really have to have a long-term plan and work according to the rules. So, I really think that's an important point. Sorry for barging in with that.
That's okay. Important points need to be made. So thank you so much, Hernan, Annick, Julius, for having shared your insights. I think we get a good picture of the challenge, the scale of the challenge, also the challenge on our end in terms of simply battery management. You know, that's also something that as individual users, we just have to get to understand how to better manage batteries. If I manage batteries like I manage the one on my phone, I'm going to be a disaster moving forward, you know. So there's also a bit of education to be done. So thank you so much for having shared your insights, and I wish you a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
That was our panel discussion. If you're interested in the topic, there is actually a course offered by EIT Urban Mobility on this specific issue around electrification. So there's a link in the chat if you would like to know more about it. And I will now hand over to Judith Schuurmans. She is Innovation Manager at EIT Urban Mobility. She's been following the conversation closely, and I think she also has a few bits and pieces of information to share with you that's quite relevant to our topic. So please, Judith, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I've been listening so carefully that I forgot how to speak. So thank you so much to Julius, Hernan, and Annick for providing all of these different insights and different perspectives. And thank you, John Paul and team, to making all of this happen. What I would like to share with you today is an opportunity. Yes. I would like to share with you today an opportunity from EIT Urban Mobility. So I am part of the innovation department, and I'm managing one of the main programs through which we cascade finance. And what is specific about the targeted program is that we look inside our portfolio of projects. And we look at what are the technologies, what are the trends that we would like to still fund and that are currently a gap in our portfolio. And of course, we also look not just inside, but look outside and look at updates and new legislations and new opportunities and trends and technologies. And based on that, we scope different calls a year in which we define different topics that we would like to fund. And in that way, we really target what we would like to fund in each call that we think is the best technologies to fund. And now there is an upcoming opportunities. It's the fourth time we do this. In August, so this summer, we launch a new, what we call a targeted call. And one of the topics, so why am I telling you all of this? One of these topics is exactly related to what we have been hearing today. So the topic is on promoting a competitive and sustainable European cycling industry, so e-bikes. And one element of this specific topic, so the subtopic, is the batteries. And I don't think I need to tell you so much more why this is so relevant and where the innovations is happening, what the opportunities are and the challenges, because we have been hearing all about that in the last 2 hours. But just here you can see a quick summary of what would be our focus of the type of projects that we would like to finance as part of these goals. So mainly it is about solutions and new innovations that improve the affordability, safety, performance, and sustainability of the batteries of e-bikes, so that we can accelerate their adoption. And as part of this, I gave some examples of technologies or topics that we would like to fund, like the battery passports, innovations in battery management systems, etc. And of course, very important, in case you're interested in this opportunity, this is the overall timeline. So we will launch this call mid-August. That would then stay open for 2 months. So around the mid of October, it would close. And if you count in the whole evaluation process and the project preparation, the projects can start the beginning of next year. To give you a bit of an idea of the general requirements and scope, the usual consortia that we fund is between 2 to 5 partners. That of course depends on the project, but this is an approximate. The consortium has to be international, so for minimum 2 member states, and the projects are required to end by the end of December. An average budget is between 300,000 and 700,000 euros. Of course, this depends highly on what type of project you would like to work on, but we offer 65% of the project costs. The aim is that you, of course, innovate. You actually have a solution that you would still like to test in real life conditions and develop to make it ready for the market. And as part of the project, you also should do a demonstration in the real life settings. So of course, if you're interested in this upcoming opportunity, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And that is, thank you for giving the opportunity to show you this call. And thank you everybody for being here today. I have learned a lot, so I'm sure you all as well. And thank you. And we see each other in the next Mobility Talk number 26 already.